the United States, it takes some accountability away, right? This is why you see Kendrick, however you read, I hope you read Kendrick's performance at the Super Bowl if you watched it, right? Kendrick didn't say anything directly necessarily to 4547. He started with, but he did say things like he had Uncle Sam in it. He said 40 acres and a mule. And so we do ourselves an injustice if we just start with 45 come 47. That's how I want to enter into this conversation.
Well, I never thought it'd see the day I would invoke lyrics from Billy Joel, and you're exactly right. He didn't start the fire. Now, he poured fuel on it, no question, but that fire has been lit since Africans arrived on these shores some 400 years ago. You're precisely right. What I look at is the labeling, and how the labeling has changed over time. If we go back to the 1960s and the backlash against civil rights and voting rights, and you look, for example, at the Wallace and Nixon campaigns in 1968, they couched a lot of their rhetoric in terms of law and order. Of course, that was coded language. And then, of course, President Nixon with the Southern strategy and trying to appeal to those Wallace Dixiecrats so that he'd win in 1972. He did, but that kind of fizzled out, especially after Watergate. Then we move into the late 1970s with the resurgent conservatism with Ronald Reagan's first campaign, second campaign for the presidency, his most serious one, in 1976, where he's talking about welfare queens. And then that becomes a major talking point. That becomes another dog whistle. 4 years later, he runs for president again, seriously, and where does he open his campaign? Neshoba County, Mississippi, 16 years after the disappearance of the 3 civil rights workers. And what's the language that he invokes? States' rights. You heard that even before the Civil War got started to justify slavery. And then the language morphs again, reverse discrimination. And then it reverberates again. You mentioned the 1619 Project. Then we start hearing critical race theory all through the summer of 2021. And then we go from critical race theory to wokeism, as if wokeism is the boogeyman in the room. And now, what have we gotten to? Now attacks on DEI. It is the same animal. It just changes different names and different shapes and different forms. We're not battling Jim Crow anymore. We're battling James Crow Esquire now. He's not wearing a white sheet anymore. He's wearing a 3-piece suit. And this is the spot we find ourselves in.
One thing I would add to that, I appreciate both of those comments, and it made me think of, there was a moment during the campaign trail where the vice president tried to correct, it's sometimes unclear exactly who he's talking to, and then it's clear who he's talking to. But he said he wanted to make clear that America is not an idea. I don't know if you remember him saying that. And one of the things that is in the background of that, why he would say that, when I was working on my dissertation, one of the books I focused on was Toni Morrison's Playing in the Dark, where she looks at the literary development or the development of American literature over time. And one of the things that she says that I agree more with than Vice President Vance is that America is an idea. It is an ongoing story that we are all playing a part in telling. And one of the things that, while it did not begin with 45 and 47, I believe that I agree with that 100%. One of the things he has picked up the ball and run with is reframing the mythology that America is founded on.
That's it.
And so one of the things that when you hear this push against in this state and others, like the removal of history, and they need history to be removed so that the mythos can regain the momentum that it had prior to him. And so this is my, I've started this job, and just the environment was different a few months ago than it is now. One of the things that they're doing, that's when we're talking about the effect on people of color, is that there's an ambivalence to his moves that is causing or the hope is to cause one to like despair and sort of settle back, if that makes sense, right? Like he's saying everything and he's saying nothing at the same time. And it's that sort of environment that's very hazy and that's very foggy that is allowing people to reposition. And it's having an effect on people of color, especially in these institutions. And it will, if he's allowed to let his myth grab hold, then it will reframe the way we understand our own position in the universities and colleges. And I think they know that that's an important first step in order to really accomplish the things that they want to accomplish.
Yeah, Lost Cause 2.0.
Yeah.
Thank you. My next question, you guys had some discussions on to begin with. And looking at where we are today, what historical moments is mirroring today's America? Since we have two history professors here.
Well, I might as well go first, honestly. And I know this is a different parallel. We did not lose World War I. Okay, we're not paying sanctions under Treaty of Versailles arrangement. I get that. And our economy is not as nearly as bad as it was in Germany in the 1930s. But I'm thinking immediately of Germany, especially the moment we're at right now, where we're seeing this unitary executive come about, and we're seeing the other branches of government capitulate. We're beginning to see bureaucracies and people in position of powers, and sadly enough, those in the news media. They're kowtowing to this president. And it begs the question to me, what's happened to the concept of separation of powers and checks and balances? This is a very disturbing trend. We're allowing a unified presidency with an appointed, dare I say, outsider to come into the government of the United States to carry out policies that would normally be afforded to Congress. The entire legislative process has been short-circuited. That's one. On the international stage, I'm seeing, the 1920s, where you see all these simmering crises that at some point will come to a head if left unchecked. We're in a very precarious situation because of both of those.
I mean, she wanted to hear from the historians, and I'm not a historian, but I am a memory worker, right?
There
So
it is.
I take interest not just in what the history tells, but what the memory is. And the memory is that Octavia Butler writes Parable of the Sower and tells us LA is going to be on fire.
Okay.
And LA is on fire. And we are responding to that in the midst of a totalitarian leader that Octavia Butler told us would be there. And the memory of that is not that necessarily for me that Octavia told us, because Black women have been telling us, as much as it is that we could not hear her as she told us, and now we're here. Just like Zora Neale Hurston, right, is kicked out nearly of the Harlem Renaissance and buried in an unmarked grave, and now we talk about her as one of the foremost because she was like ethnographers. And so this moment is so that's the first thing I want to say, right, is that we are like in this moment where I'm not surprised by this moment. The shell shock that other folks are experiencing in this moment, I'm not experiencing. So I need to name that. I also, you got it this, right? This idea of America, this construction of the American project, right? In some ways, we are repeating history in some ways, but in some ways we're just we're living into what the American project intended to be. And what I saw on the right was, or 45, was like, make America great again. America never was great. And on the left, the rhetoric, a lot of it, right, and when I say the left, I'm mostly speaking about the Democratic affiliated left. Every text message I got during the campaign was like, save our democracy. And to me, those are two sides of the same coin. Because you're asking me to save a democracy that was never worth saving.
Right. That's so good. I I feel like it's pushing me to get in trouble. I like what you just
feel
said.
like that happens
Yeah,
every time
right.
we
Yeah,
get
yeah. I'll be brave. So, as I was leaving grad school, one of the things that was said to me constantly was that I need to cheer up and be happier. I'll tell you a quick story. It's quick, I promise. So this was the 2020 election, and we were heading. I was in a class on the metaphysics of race in the fall. We were heading into the election. It was like November. We were all there. And so Joe Biden was elected. And I got on the Zoom for my class, and they were celebrating. Some of the professor and some of the students, and I wasn't as celebratory. So he asked me why, and I was like, well, if we look at the numbers, sure, Joe Biden won, but like 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. And when I started to do the math, I thought about like standing in a Kroger at any moment, how I was surrounded by people who wanted to the world to be a way that was detrimental to people like me, and et cetera. And so that class ends in December. And in January, January 6th happens. And I drafted an email. I never sent it, but I drafted it. And I was gonna ask my professor, is this what you wanted me to cheer up about? Right? Because this idea, I've been, the whole drive here from Memphis, I was thinking about, like, we use language like, oh, are we repeating, is history repeating itself? And one could reframe the question and ask, have we ever left history? Right? You have to leave in order for it to repeat. And this idea that we have advanced is constantly challenged, like over and over again. And I'm sure in your head you could think of things that seem to mark progress, but with every mark of progress, it seems like America is duty-bound to remind us of what it wants to be. And that's who 45 is, 47. It's like, no. This is what we wanted to, like, there may be, even if you feel like you've inchwormed ahead, you haven't, right? So this idea that, like, we're even on a linear move forward in time, I think if we really look at the way things are working, we're more in a circle than we are in a straight line. And so I thought, you brought up Nicole Hannah-Jones earlier in her 1619 project. Some wanted to treat it as if Nicole Hannah-Jones pulled that number out of the sky, and we're reacting. But if you start, and lo and behold, I was reading Ida B. Wells one day, and Ida B. Wells does the same math, right? Depending on which black intellectual you are reading at any given time, 1619 is a number that's on their mind. So what I'm saying is, while things may feel new, they are often not new. And it's this I think it's this, our clinging to this ideal of progress that's tricking us into the belief that we've moved forward and we are actually like circling. So I don't know how to answer, like, what moment reminds me of the past. Like, it feels like we are still in the past.
Dr. St. Bernard, you said something really interesting to me in terms of, what do you think America wants to be?
America gets off the ground in this dissonance that it never fully got over. So there's an individual, you've heard it, there's an individual who's writing, that we are all endowed, that all men are created equal, and is an enslaver.
Right.
Now, he never puts pen to paper to explain how he has reconciled those two ideas. So then those two ideas move to the background. That is America. How can America purport to be the bearer of these ideals while practicing in real time this very problematic practice? Okay, so then you have emancipation, legal emancipation. And then we move into this window of Reconstruction, and America immediately closes the door on that with the lynching era. And again, if you read Ida B. Wells' Red Record or whatever, or any of the many individuals who are trying to make sense of the lynching era at the time, the dissonance is still there. Like, it's purporting to be a thing. Meanwhile, thousands of people are gathering around a tree and setting someone on fire, and then wrestling over the buttons and teeth and nails of this individual. They're taking pictures of postcards and sending them to family members. Wish you were here. Oh, heard you had a baby. On the flip side of that postcard is a lynching. That dissonance is the story of America. So what it wants to be is it wants to proclaim that it is this bearer of freedom and liberty and democracy to the world. Meanwhile, it's practicing in things that are should be obviously contradictory. So I think the way I would answer that is that America wants you to believe in its words, but not its practice. And its practice is that it only feels settled if there's a certain hierarchy, and anything that disturbs that hierarchy is immediately dealt with in brutal ways, regardless of what it's saying at any given moment. Does that?
Yes.
Okay.
So are you saying that America wants to be what we're seeing right now?
America is what we're saying.
Or is, and when we see Biden and Clinton and Obama, those are not outliers, but something went wrong from what America truly wants to be.
And I would also add that, and you're not wrong, because there's a difference between the isness versus the oughtness of American reality. The isness is, you're right, southern trees bearing strange fruit. The oughtness is all men are created equal.
Right.
Now, here's the deal. This is why I'm hopeful, is because those same tools that we use to fight against slavery, those same tools, that same language that we use to fight against Jim Crow, those same tools are available to us now. No, when Jefferson penned those words, all men are created equal, he certainly didn't mean all men. He certainly didn't mean all women. He certainly didn't mean people of color. That's true. That was the language of the Enlightenment. But over the course of time and through amendment and the shedding of blood, yes, I can claim that heritage, and proudly so. And as Dr. King reminded us, one of the great glories of America is to fight for right, against evil. And so we do have a window, we do have an out. Now, is that climb going to be very slow? Absolutely. It has never been fast for us. Life for us has not been a crystal stair. But at least the tools are there in place, and there I'm hopeful, and I'm not willing to give up on the democratic experiment.
Okay, so I don't want to seem like I'm trying to give up on that. I just am interested in I'm interested in the role the hypocrisy is playing.
Okay.
And so to hold up a mirror to someone who does not want to look in a mirror, how does that go? Right? So yes, we have a mirror, and that mirror, so is Jefferson aware of his hypocrisy? Is he, or is he not aware? Or does he believe more in himself than he should at that moment? These are all the questions. And so I am not frustrated or upset at anyone who takes those ideals and holds them up to America and asks America to make sense of their hypocrisy. I'm interested in the role that the hypocrisy is playing in America's own image of itself. Because there's a story we want to tell where America is not aware and it's just forward marching. There are hiccups along the way, but progress is the intention. Or is America just saying things so that it can cover over what it wants to be? I don't want to get into the analogy and ask anyone in the crowd if you've had a partner who was good at lying to you. Do they know they're lying? Do they not? That's one set of questions. But what's interesting is that the lie is harming, right? Like, that's true. And you could get in the room with them and say, hey, but you said X when you meant Y. Like, there is an argument, but that argument feels like it would only go, it only goes as far as that partner is willing to be earnest about their lying. But if the lying is used as a tool to manipulate, then holding up the hypocrisy is not going to work. Does that make sense? Because they don't want to do right by you. So that's the question. Yes, there's one thing we're doing, but like I don't know. Does it know it's lying?
I'll be the one. I give up on the Democratic experience. I do. I've given, but 45 isn't the reason. 45 come 47 is not the reason that I gave up on it. And I give up on it because of how much I believe in the new world and how much it is required of me to give up an allegiance to the Democratic experience. Because for me, right, I've dabbled in a couple of different things, right? I spent the large part of the last 6 years documenting all the known lynchings in Davidson County. And in the middle of this, the Metro Nashville Police Department lynched 2 men. And I really entered into public memory work as I exited more of made a little bit of a transition in my larger involvement with the movement for Black Lives. And the reason that I got into public memory work, I said, I'm a Nashville native. I said, I want us to draw the through line here, and did some work with EJI and said, we're not doing this work in our city. We're not doing this work in the city. And I said, it's not coincidental that a man was lynched a block from where a man was shot in 2019. Like, that's not coincidental. And historians, my friends in movement, were supportive of my work, still are supportive of my work, but they were dealing with trying to get community oversight of the police, right? We got community oversight of the police in Nashville for the state to then come back and say, actually, you can't have a community oversight board in the way that you have literally by petition advocated to get one. And Daniel Hambrick, right, I'm asking my friends to come to this market dedication, and my friends are like, we got to go knock on Daniel Hambrick's mama's door tomorrow and see how she's doing because the Metro Police shot him dead. And historians, I'm sitting in the room with these historians, and they're like, we want to talk about Cordy Cheek, who was lynched. We want to talk about these folks in Nashville that were lynched, but we don't want to talk about Daniel Hambrick. And so there is my only hope at this point is to give up on this Democratic experience, because for me, there wasn't a place to hold both of those experiences. But what I will say is I'm not asking anybody else to give it up. I don't care about you giving it up. I don't care if you keep it. What I do want people to do is to come out of being paralyzed. So if it's paralyzing you, you need to give it up. Right? If it's moving you towards a better America or a new world, whatever it is, then okay, you can hold on to it. And I think what's been interesting post-November has been the state of, it feels like people are paralyzed, right? Even in my community especially in Black, middle, and upper class communities. And so I want to see us move past Kamala Harris couldn't be elected, right? I want to see us moving past watching a sorority girl who did all the things that the white boys did and still couldn't become the president lose, so that we can actually return to the work of a new democracy, of the new world. Like, I don't have to be in a rhetorical battle about the language we use to say, how do we all agree that this is not working? And what are we going to do about it?
Well, thank you. What does this new world look like to you? I know that's you want me to answer that? Yes. Since what has given up on democracy means and a new world.
I mean, it doesn't look like this, right? I want a world where, right, as an educator, I'm thinking a lot. I spend a lot of time in schools, and so the world I imagine is one where all children have access to an equitable education free from disruption, including by the state, right? It's a world where it's impossible for ICE to come to a school and remove a student, right? Like, those types of things are not imaginable, right? A student coming into a school to learn, regardless of how they ended up there, regardless of their immigration status, right? This is a place of learning, of critical thinking, and ICE, right, should have the state imposition in that way. We should be turning them away at the door, right? We shouldn't be sending statements about we're going to call our legal counsel and we're going to take them to a quiet area in conference. No, you cannot come here. You are not welcome. Policing in this country has got to shift and change. It's a derivative of slave catching. That's just what it is. We've got to let it go, right? We are still, that's why the language you use, Dr. St. Bernard, around emancipation is so important, right? Because we are still incarcerating Black people, right? Slavery just has taken other forms. So abolition is absolutely essential. And when I talk about abolition, especially in forums like this, people get nervous. And that's not to say that, for me, that we don't have instances of safety. Institutions, not even institutions, but we absolutely can keep our own communities safe. I know this because I live in a Black community, and I have 20 people in my phone that I can call before I call the police. Because it's more apt that if I call the police in this country as a Black woman, that I'm going to be the one dead. They are killing Black women in their kitchens for boiling water. So policing, that's top of mind. You know, and we use this, like, we talk about America as a superpower. We talk about America as advanced. And to me, in a nation state, right, that is advanced, there's universal health care. Black women are not dying having babies. You know, I have imagined and believe in a new world. And also, like, I don't get to determine what the new world looks like by myself. Because there are ways in which I have been marginalized, absolutely, and there are ways that I'm an Ivy League educated, middle class adjacent woman. I don't get to make the new world up by myself. And in the tradition of my ancestors, in the tradition of indigenous culture, wouldn't desire to. Part of the problem of the American project is that a few men made it up, and a whole lot of other men and women got with it.
Bars. That's good. That's really good.
Well, I'm wondering what the alternative is. If we're going to give up on liberal democracy, what is going to be the alternative? Because I see a very frightening, brave new world coming about. And that is the world of autocracy. And that's the world of despotism. That's the world where wars of aggression, the erasure of democracy, and ruling by fiat, by strong men, that is becoming the norm all over the world. And that is a very disturbing trend to me. So yeah, I guess my hope in process democracy, liberal democracy, may sound a little bit Pollyannish to some, maybe to others, but here's the thing. I am afraid of the alternative because we have seen this autocratic movie play itself out in real time before, and millions of people have died. And I don't want to see that movie again.
Do you think that we are on a collision course to a civil war or a civil rights movement? Another.
I wouldn't say a civil war in the 1861 sense, because you had entire state governments seceding from the Union. I don't see that, but I do see civil conflict at some point in some manifestation coming, because the temperature is very, very high. And January 6th, to your point, to me was a warning shot. And the rise of militia groups, that's a warning shot. And domestic terror is just as real as something that Al-Qaeda could have pulled off. And the statistics bear that out. So I don't know where this plane is going to land, but I'm very, very pessimistic about the next 20 years, maybe the next 20 months.
I mean, I will hide my response behind a question in order to like be safe, try to be safe from the import of what I'm trying to say. I think that in my work, I try to make the argument that you could draw a line from the lynching era to its afterlives. So the lynching era is in the afterlife of enslavement.
Yeah. Christina Shaw.
Right, and so then the afterlife of lynching, there's an afterlife of lynching, and that looks like police brutality, and state-sanctioned like vigilante violence. I was talking to my wife earlier today about I was on the way to drop her off to work, and I was talking to her about Ahmaud Arbery. And the thing that scares me about Ahmaud Arbery, and I haven't gotten the answer yet, is why is that guy recording? Why is his phone on? Let's say they took themselves to really be chasing someone who they thought was stealing. Why is his phone on as they murder him? You cannot help but go back in your mind to when there needed to be evidence of this to show your friends who couldn't be there to see it. And so if these lines can be drawn in certain ways, one of the things that worries me is that the sentiment that drove the lynching era, we didn't deal with. Not narratively, not legally, like we never really confront. I think lynching scares America so much that it never looked at it. It tried to never look at it again, right? But that means the sentiment didn't leave. And if the sentiment didn't leave, could it be evoked again? That's the question where I hide, or I'm gonna try to hide behind, right? Because the belief is that we've moved on, but depending on who you ask, which scholar, the lynching era ends in the 30s or the 40s, that wasn't that long ago. Nope. And so if it wasn't that long ago, and we haven't dealt with it, we're seeing other echoes, right? In those lynching photos, there are grandchildren of participants there that are alive today. Like when you look at a photo and those people are looking back, one of the things that I've been interesting lately is like we do this thing where we villainize those individuals and we monsterize them. But many of them went home and bounced their grandchildren on their knee and had dinner. Some went back to school, some went back to church. Like they were normal, if that makes sense. They were human beings. So did they instruct the generations behind them in the sentiments, right? Like, have we freed ourselves enough of the sentiment? I don't think we have. And so this idea that we can't go back there is not an idea that I hold. I just think it's, when you talk about civil war, and I'm not sure, but I do think that sort of vigilante justice, that sort of state-sanctioned or really the state looking the other way, I don't think we're far from that. And that, I think we could see versions of that again. Easy.
Yeah. You make me think what you just said about a couple of things. Two things come to mind that are top of mind. One is that scare me, right? The first is there's this commitment to this deep disembodiment, right? The ability to see the ideals of America, the virtues and the values and principles and practices completely outside of our beings. Okay. And it's really dangerous because it undergirds so much of the ways that white supremacy are operational in our society. There's a scholar, Rez Menachem. He does a lot about understanding, in particular, like racialized violence from the ways that it impacts white-bodied and brown and black-bodied folks. And there's a way in which if this stuff is outside of us and we can remove ourselves from it, depending on where you stand, you either are not implicated or you are not allowed to hold it accountable. And there's this distance from it, right? You make a point about time, right? There's this distance, like this stuff is, first of all, the American project in and of itself is not that old. This empire is still young enough to fall. And, in my opinion, and like my enslaver's great-great-grandson is in my phone, right? Like, exist is a human being, one that I think has very different ideals than his great-great-grandfather who enslaved my great-great-grandfather. But these people are walking around. And the other side of the coin is that when you hear something like Make America Great Again, and on the other side you hear something like We Won't Go Back, it's this commitment, right, that we've moved from it. Right. And I know from my own experience that that's just not the case. And a case in point of this that I'll tell a short story is these people's obsessions with getting married on plantations. I was in South Carolina this time last year on a plantation called the Boone Plantation. And the tour guide takes us on a tour. He says, the first red flag, right? On a tour, we're in this house, this plantation, in the main house on this plantation. He says, what's another name for a plantation? And people raise their hand and are reluctant, but raise their hand and say different things. He did not get the answer he wants. He goes on and he says, a farm. Well, as a descendant of a plantation, I raise my hand and say, yeah, no, that's not accurate, and then walk out of the tour. As I'm sitting out on the bench, the people on the tour are taken out of a back door so that the wedding party that was coming to get married could pull up. They pull up in all black and white, and these are white folks, but black people are getting married on plantations too, so that's a whole nother thing. They pull up, they're in there all white, they pull up for this wedding. We've eventually finished our tour. The reception is going to be held literally feet away from where the enslaved quarters are. And but that's not even, just to show you just the dissonance, that's not even like the biggest part of the story. The biggest part of the story is that we get on this bus. I'm on this bus with other Harvard Divinity School students, and we're pulling away, and the police have pulled over a black man in a Mercedes, and they are strip searching him under the shade tree on this plantation. And my professor tells the bus driver, pull over, and says, Pascal, Brittany, come and record this, because we don't know how this is going to go down. And if I'm a black woman, I'm from the South, I know the plantation my people came from, but if there was ever a moment where I could understand the way that this dissonance plays out moment to moment in people's actual bodies, it was the 30 minutes in which a plantation was called a farm. People were sent out of the back door so that people could come and get married at the plantation. And before that 30 minutes was up, the police's pullover spot is the same plantation. It was all right there in front of me.
I wanted to, I'm not texting, I looked something up on my phone because I wanted to say the right thing. So for, his first run, Trump's first run, Make America Great Again, the mantra rang out. And it's not that, since we're dealing in history, that mantra alone is not new. No. It's a remix of something. Not even a remix. It's like plagiarized. But anyway, so it was ambivalent as to when the again was evoking. So then a few weeks ago, or a few months, like recently, since the election, he has narrowed it. Because you can ask theoretically, what do you mean by again? Where are we going back to, right? So he couched it in the tariff language, but he said he wanted to bring us back to the Gilded Age, where if you do the math, that's from about like 1870 to 1910. That's the very era we've been talking about this, right? So like, yes, it's couched in economic language, but it's interesting that he wants to go back to the time when thousands of black men, women, and children were lynched extrajudicially with no accountability. Is that a coincidence? I do not think so. And will we find the courage? Like the lynching era, when it was raging, was couched in economy. The People's Grocery, the individuals who started the People's Grocery, they were lynched in Memphis because the arrival store owner did not want to be in economic competition with them. So what the part of the dissonance is that we separate the violence from the intention of the violence. And so like he just connected it for us. Again, there's an era he wants to go back to, and many of his ilk want to go back to, and it just so happens to coincide when it's what some call the nadir of American history. It's when it's arguably its most dark. And I don't think, like, to connect, to that story, I don't think that's a coincidence. And one we have to attend to and grapple with immediately.
And let me add to that, the legal and judicial and political the status of things that undergirded that period, you began to see the Supreme Court of the United States, for example, walk away from the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and begin to apply it not to the individuals, not to the formerly enslaved, but to apply it to corporations. While at the same time, the federal government has decided, beginning with the slaughterhouse cases all the way up through Plessy, there's a determination to allow the states to do their worst. They call it dual federalism, but they're basically saying we're going to just look the other way. And so that even makes it even more prescient in the fact that these very policies and these very events that we're talking about had been sanctioned by the central government.
Yeah. All the while, it's like, don't teach history to any students. We're taking those books out.
Don't read them.
Right, because then you begin to connect dots that.
And then coming on top of that is the lost cause. You know, the Dunning School on Reconstruction, the idea that the Confederacy was this grand idea where they were defending a valiant cause, and Reconstruction was so horrible, and irresponsible African Americans were serving in Congress because they were being supported by the Army through what they called bayonet rule. And so in 2 and 3 generations were taught in the lost cause. They were still, when I was in school, talking about the war between the states, even in the 1970s. So that pathos still continued for a long time, and sadly enough, it became permanently ingrained.
And then a plane crashes, and it's like, oh, it's DEI. Like you have to like to not hear the resonance is intentional. It's like you don't want to hear them, as opposed to them not being as obvious as they are. Not you. When I say you, I mean
in the abstract, yes,
more,
exactly.
The general you.
So I wanted to look at some of these executive orders by Trump. And I think people are forgetting that executive orders aren't law
At all.
at all, but
Yeah. Say that one more time for the mic.
so birthright citizenship, which guarantees citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil, is protected by the 14th Amendment, and any attempts to revoke it will bring immediate legal challenges. So what Trump did, wants to do away with birthright citizenship, which is to do away with an aspect of the 14th Amendment.
Right.
The other, he signed an order to remove gender ideology guidance from federal government communication policies and forms, and make it official there's only 2 genders, males and females. In fact, he directed federal agencies to use the term sex, not gender. And all diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility programs. Terminate all positions related to DEI. Repealed an order signed by Biden advancing racial equity for underserved communities, and the aforementioned order combating discrimination based on gender identity and sexual orientation. Instructs cabinet head to develop a strategy within 90 days to eliminate federal funds from being used for discriminatory treatment and indoctrination of K-12 students, including based on gender ideology and discriminatory equity ideology. Reestablish the 1776 Commission within the Education Department, focus on patriotic education.
Yeah.
And what I don't get is how we are fighting in terms of Democrat versus Republican over all these federal his executive orders,
Right.
when these orders that I'm talking about were bipartisan.
Right.
How did he make something that was bipartisan seem like it was only Democratic or minority or LGBTQ or...
Well, let me ask the $64 question. Either one of two things is going on. Either we're being punked, and he knows that these executive orders are not going to hold water, and that he's playing to the MAGA crowd, but he's not going to run, well, I don't know about run for re-election again, he just might. But is either he knows that and playing to his base, or he has a perfect opportunity. Next week, I believe he's going to address Congress. He could easily go before Congress next week, propose a complete repeal and reshaping of the 14th Amendment to do it. He could go through and have those other orders with regard to equal employment opportunity, the 64 Act, the 72 Act, all those. He could have some of those repealed by Congress, but he won't do it, and it begs the question, why? And in my view, what I'm seeing is that he is totally trying to reshape the institution of the presidency to make it a unitary presidency, and Congress is a rubber stamp. Congress is an afterthought. And if that's the case, we are in a more dangerous position than I can imagine.
I don't disagree with that, actually. I also think I don't even want to. I personally, I'm not going to respond to like the order by order. But what I think you got onto something when you first said, you said that an executive order is not a law,
Right.
And I think that most of the people in this room, maybe, and the people in this panel can exercise logic. People who exercise logic understand that. People interested in the democracy understand that. But what concerns me, right, is that the blind followers that worship 4547 as a sort of godlike figure. I know this because I drove through rural East Tennessee the day after he was almost assassinated, and they had a sign up that said, "His name is not dead." I said, "Oh, this is the people that worship Trump, right? For who are in the I said his name, Lord, who are I have not said his name. I don't ever say his name. Forgive me. The ones that worship him as a god don't care if it's a law or not,
Right.
and are willing January 6th to act on it regardless of what it is. And so what I think about is like, what does an executive order mean for the 4547 that is in your school, your church, your community, over your city government, right? Like that, there's some that's part of the conversation that I'm not sure we're having, right? It's like there is a 4547 in your community, or 45 could not be 47 and could not have been 45. And sometimes 4547 is in your house. See the way white women vote. And if we get distracted by the orders, we cannot mobilize to look at what is happening, to look at the culture that's being created, the larger shift, right? If we're distracted by what's coming from his desk every day. We also have to think about strategy, right? And while I may not agree with anything that 4547 does, some of this is just strategy. And some of the strategy is the overwhelm of, I just got here, and I'm going to do everything I can, everything I said I was going to do. And right now, the way I can enact that is to write a bunch of things up that I know people who are already moving towards despair are going to see. You know, Elon Musk, notice it when this stuff comes out. If you were a federal employee, depending on who has sense, your weekend was ruined last week because you got an email, and regardless of if you got the email or not, you kept hearing about the email. Everywhere you went, somebody was talking to you about the email. You went to church and somebody walked up to you and said, "Is your job safe?" "I'm so sorry." And then you got back to confusion from people who are supposed to be over you about what to do with this email. So I keep going back. I keep going back to this, like, what is our move in terms of strategy here? How do we get past, like, he is going to put executive orders out until he goes out of office, right? Or until we see how they pushed out Project 2025 and how the left had no real response to it in a concerted way. And we've got to figure out what the strategy is. As much as we are, like, reading these executive orders and saying, this is what's happening, this is how we're implicated. We've got to protect the law, right? We've got to uphold the law in the ways that it supports the people.
The only thing I would add to that is I think I suspect that the executive orders are not a legal play at all, but they're a mythological play. He wants to change the way we see the world. I cite the Gulf of America. He tried that the first go with the map and the hurricanes. Y'all remember the Sharpie map?
I do.
That got pushed back. He went home, worked a better play. Now, if you look up right now in your phone, if you use Google Maps or Apple, it says the Gulf of America. So these executive orders, I think, are an attempt to reframe the narrative. And I again, I cite her often, but, like, following Ida B. Wells' lead, I think she suggests that the law has always been trailing behind the narrative. It's never been the other way around. And so if you get the story right, the law will follow.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to get the story right. He does, even the fact that the orders now seem to land as law, the fact that that has to be cleared up benefits the agenda. Because if he can reach the level of divine fiat, then the law will capitulate to what he wants to do. And so part of the strategy, even that the 1776, that's a counter narrative to what Nicole Hannah-Jones did. So that he's trying to get the story right, and then he wants a collective submission to the story. And I think once that happens, it seems like the strategy is like, once that happens, then the laws will take care of themselves.
And Steve Bannon said the quiet part out loud at the beginning of the second administration, that the goal was to flood the zone. And he has done that successfully, because it seems to me with each passing day and each passing part of the news cycle, the conversation changes and we're losing sight of what's really important.
Right.
And the left is completely discombobulated now.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you to our panelists. And now it's time for audience question and answers. And so if you have a question, please come to the middle to the microphone to ask. Don't be scared.
Oh.
Thank you.
All right.
Does anybody have any questions? Or panelists, you can ask questions of your fellow panelists.
Yeah, how are you spending your days right now? How should we be spending our days to move towards hope?
How am I, or how should I?
I mean, both. Like, how do you want to be? It's not a wrong answer.
I wish I had the resolve you had to, like, ignore all the noise. I do. I don't. And so a lot of the day, I find myself more interested in art now, as whether it be music or whatever, as an attempt to stave off the despair that I know that they want to set in. Because with despair comes apathy, and then with apathy, they're like, so I just think that, like, I go back to music, listening to some Marvin Gaye on the way here, and just trying to go back because we're not in a new moment.
Yeah.
We have a lot of music at our disposal that was trying to meet the moment. So that's definitely one way that
Ooh, that's a good
I try to do.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing. When I come in from the office, I don't turn on the news immediately. You listen to Marvin Gaye, I'll listen to some John Coltrane.
Okay. All right.
And, some Coltrane, some Monk, some Max Roach, something like that. And just kind of unwind at least until about 8 or so. Then I might check in for a little bit. Then I might not. And then I'll catch BBC World News because I've watched this stuff all day on my phone. And I just refuse to give this negative energy free rent in my head. I will not give them that kind of power. I'm going to stay informed, I'm going to stay on top of it, but I'm not going to let it consume me.
Thank you. I have a question.
Thank you. It's more of a comment than a question. I'd just like to hear your response to it. And it goes to what you were talking about when you talked about the executive orders and then the comment that you made about the laws following the narrative. And I think it was either yesterday or the day before, I saw a comment from the Speaker of the House that said they were going to look at making these executive orders into legislation. And I'd just like your comments on that.
Question with Speaker Johnson is, does he have the votes? And I don't think he does. I think he's on pins and needles even as we speak about this budget resolution. Even Steve Scalise let the cat out of the bag now. Even if it were to pass the House, there's going to be some resistance in the Senate. So this is legislatively anything but a done deal, any of it.
Thank you. What do you two think?
I would agree. I think that I would agree wholeheartedly with that. I have the feeling, right, that the party is not as much with him as they are, as we think, or as some of us think. I've never thought that, and the people the electorate that elected 45 come 47 is a part of the Republican constituency, but not it in its totality. In particular, in the old money, like you said, the Senate. It's just I don't think the votes are there yet, and I don't think that nor do I think that the administration is moving in such a way where they are going to be willing to escalate in ways to force or get those votes in the immediate future, because it just wouldn't be strategic.
So, just to ask a quick clarifying question, did I understand correctly that the president has openly endorsed or praised the Gilded Age? Was that the president that made that comment, or did I misunderstand something?
No worries. 1 second.
The question was, has the president?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing about going back to the Gilded
Make America
Age.
Great Again.
Whose
Was the Gilded Age?
brilliant idea was that?
Yeah. Hold on. Because it's an NPR article, Christian Monitor. I'm trying to find a direct quote where he said it. He connects because he says like the tariffs that he wants to use were most effective during the Gilded Age.
You know, that's interesting, because not only is the Gilded Age the time when Jim Crow, was really cauterized. And voter suppression was really cauterized. I mean, it was the near, John Luther Franklin called it the nadir of race relations for a reason. But the Gilded Age was also the single greatest wealth disparity in the history of the United States.
Absolutely.
And I doubt very seriously that that's coincidental.
No, I agree. I agree with you. 100%. And I think the reason why that jumped out to me is because in the wake of the election, a lot of people, okay, so here, I'll read you the quote, just so you, so he says, when we were a smart country in the 1890s, this is when the country was relatively the richest it ever was. It had all tariffs. It didn't have an income tax. And so the reason why that jumped out to me is because there were individuals, some on the right, some on the left, who are trying to frame the vote around economic terms, right? Like people, egg prices, things like that. And I think when he identifies that period, he's showing the convergence of the economic and the racial and the so the economic is never alone. The economic in American history has never been isolated. It's always been in company with other effects and forces. And so for him to go back to that time was deeply interesting to me.
That's
Capital was 1886, the bosses of the Senate. 1886. Like, you look at the bosses today.
Right.
You know, we have the bosses of the Senate.
Right.
Today.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And you got at it, right?
Hannah.
I think that the left has done the Democrats have done a terrible job of many things. One of them is like understanding that we are taught racial and gender capitalism, and understanding in particular how it undergirds every part of this nation. And that's a big part of where we're at, and why the use of economic, like talking in economics we could talk. I was in a college class once, like very early sociology class, and we could talk about chattel slavery, right, as economics, right? And the currency of it, right, is black bodies. So we're always talking about, in my opinion, as a black queer feminist, we're always talking about not just racial capitalism, but racialized, gender-based capitalism.
And see, when I think of the 1890s, one of the first things that pops out into my mind is the rights wanting to stick with the gold standard, that's one, but also when President Grover Cleveland broke the Pullman strike, which was a direct assault on organized labor.
Union. Yeah.
Hi, I'm with you. I don't watch the news. I can't, and I've been in social media conversations with Brian and others with regard to what just recently happened to Joy Reid, which to me is just one more symptom of some really wonky stuff going on with our media that's supposed to be our truth tellers, in theory. I don't know, again, I don't know if that's ever been the case, but it seems really bad right now. And so I guess my question is, where do we go to really understand what's going on if we can't trust even any of the media anymore? So.
Because the truth tellers, as we saw over this weekend and particularly last night, the truth tellers are being silenced. And the sad thing about it is, I don't think that there's much of a coincidence between the firing of Joy Ann Reid and Lester Holt leaving the Nightly News, and what's the other lady from? Alex Wagner. I don't think that's coincidental. Whenever the truth tellers get a little bit too close to the facts, they're mysteriously fired. We saw that with Keith Olbermann close to 20 years ago. And so, it raises the question, who can you rely on, A, if the truth tellers are gone, or B, if their remaining truth tellers are afraid to speak? And therein lies the danger. Here again, now freedom of the press is coming under attack.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like creators are doing this thing where everybody left X, went to Blue Sky. I said, I can't, okay, go to Blue Sky, y'all. And then Substack, right? People came over to Substack. I've been on Substack a little while. People are like, now we leaving Substack. I said, where y'all, when do we create our own independent presses? Right. Like that are actually peer reviewed, right? There are ways, and I hate to sometimes be the person that's like, create it. And in some ways, it is necessary, right? Like in the way that people have mobilized about Joy Reid, she can have her own network right now, right? Because I saw how the particular constituency, you know, Joy Reid is like who my mama, who's here with me, and my auntie listen to, right? And so for them, I'm sad because it's like, that's their girl. But if they would get behind her and get out of the group chat, she could have a Joy Reid network by Monday. So I guess maybe I'm naive to believe that, but I think that where you ask a question about like, where do you go? Like, you figure out who in your community is telling the story, the more complete story, and you figure out how to amplify that. Because there's always the story that the newspaper tells, but like in my own archival research, it's like letters and stuff I never thought, Lorraine Hansberry is a prime example. I've been reading the stuff that she published, but I've been reading the stuff that people found. And like the stuff that people found tells a very different narrative than the stuff that she published, right? And that may or may not have been intentional. We ask ourselves about public and private. I don't want to go on a tangent there, but it is not impossible. I think Don Lemon, who I don't necessarily follow, he's doing this, right, with how he is really, really, really committed to the building up of his own platform right now. And I think that is the sooner that we start to build our own platforms, even if we are, working on the plantation. Because I would say, Joy Reid, I'm sad to see her go, but it's par for the course in this climate, right? It's especially as a black woman, right? This is how Harvard has a black woman president in September when I get there, and when I graduate in May has a white Jewish man as his president, right? So how are we ahead of the curve, especially in the curation and creation of our own platforms?
I supplement that with learning the history of this nation and learning it out of the mouths of, you bring up the Dunning School, like reading Du Bois's Black Reconstruction, reading Red Record by Ida B. Wells, just getting to know the voices of that time, T. Thomas Fortune, Frederick Douglass, because you learn, you familiarize yourself with the contours that we never seem to get beyond. And I think it helps contextualize the stories when the truth is coming and when the truth isn't coming. The thing that made me really sad about the Joy Reid firing, like when you saw like Morning Joe,
Oh boy.
the way they caved and then went to Mar-a-Lago, and because the way they're framing it is like, oh, there was a shakeup coming because ratings and all that, but ratings are what they are. And so the fact that like, even on that network, like she's a threat, because that's supposed to be that's supposed to be where she's safe, right? Because that's the story we tell ourselves. But again, I think we have to disabuse ourselves of this story where like this left-right story thing that we tell ourselves. And the way to do that is, create, as it was said, but also to familiarize yourself with the past, because then you recognize that like, oh, Joy Reid was never safe. Yeah.
And you can ritual. I'll say this, and I don't mean this in like a religious way necessarily, though I am a religious scholar of religion. What are you when people say like, I'm not watching the news, like I'm wondering, and I ask, how are you spending your time? Turn towards get Libby, right, and get like Ida B. Wells. Like a lot of this stuff is readily accessible. I've been listening to Black queer feminists a lot, like Toni Morrison, right? Like just on YouTube, just like listening. She's critiquing this country about race in such powerful ways, and it's good sometimes to hear people say, this is not okay, this has not been okay, but this has always existed. This is, Audre Lorde, right? Like Baldwin, especially, right? But there's even especially Baldwin. So sometimes I'm listening to Baldwin. Baldwin is like, he's telling us and so much, right? And I'm doing that sometimes, and then sometimes I have his record collection on Spotify, so I'm listening. He also had great taste in music, so finding the balance of like, are we going to listen to Notes of a Native Son, or are we going to listen to James Baldwin's record collection? And both are valuable. Like both are moving me towards revolution, actually.
I would even go one further and say, and it's on YouTube in full, The debate that James Baldwin had with William F. Buckley Jr. at
at
Cambridge.
Cambridge.
It was simply brilliant, and I would encourage all of you to watch that in full.
Yes. 3 times. Watch it 3 times.
100%. That's really good.
That's a good one.
I want to say kudos to the panel. You all have done an outstanding
Thank you.
job, and you all answered one of my questions, because I think as individuals, sometimes we sit in the house and we take in all the negativity, but we have to think outside of ourselves. And what you said so much, we need to tell the truth about history. And that means African American people and Caucasian people. You're not helping yourselves when you try to erase our truth. And we're not helping ourselves when we don't learn our truth and tell our children. They're not going, I am a speech language pathologist by profession that became a kindergarten teacher and an instructional coach. I stayed in schools for over 32 years. And what you trust your teachers, teachers mean well, but it's your history. It's on you to school your children, your grandchildren, so that they know and they feel proud. Because some African American children think that all anybody black ever did was to be a slave.
Right.
And so many things that we use on a daily basis, some African American person developed that. And, you know, I just love that. I just want to put, and another thing too, this is about economics a lot. Yes. Because anytime 10% of the country, they have all the money and other people are struggling, something's wrong with that picture. And as long as they can keep us divided and distracted, we're going to be in the same, and we can't look to this party and that party and all that. We've got to look to each other.
Yeah, I just want to affirm that. I work alongside the stuff I do at Rhodes. I also work with the Lynching Sites Project of Memphis, and one of the things we've been thinking about a lot is what it would mean to sort of take education into our own hands and like not depend on the schools to educate. Like we have the mechanisms and the capacity to teach well this history, and so maybe the time has come where we don't need to put all of the burden on the social studies teacher, right? And just or just maybe unduly expect them to do it, but we could do it ourselves. I don't know how this evocation is going to go, but I think about the Black Panther Party and their free breakfast and education programs. Like, they understood the power of getting the history right for the children, and we may need organizations to recapture that vision.
Yeah. Absolutely. You see that, like, Lenny, you see that with the Panthers, you see that with the Freedom Schools, right? You see us take, there's a lineage of taking education into our own hands, and also to really supporting the folks that are trying to do that, you know, right? Like, I have some phenomenal Black and brown and white even colleagues in classrooms every day doing good work that are not backed, right? That don't have the backing of their school board or the backing of their school principal. You know, so it's, for me, that's a both and thing, right? Because I mean, the data shows us, right, one Black teacher, right, helps monumentally propel all students. And so, yeah, I just agree. I just want to echo, like, the role of education and also the narrative that education only occurs in school. You know, like, we taking responsibility for popular education is big and major, and those are all things that I think great avenues for us to be pursuing right now and spending some significant time thinking about.
And we also need to start with this premise, and I'm going to say it once, and I want you to hear me well. Black history does not start in slavery. Okay, we need to start from that premise from the beginning, because a lot of our children do not have a positive view of Africa or African-centered culture. They take the National Geographic narrative of African history, and their teachers don't know anything about Cheikh Anta Diop, or John Henrik Clark, or Francis Cress Welsing. And so, yeah, it's going to be us who are going to take that ownership and expose our children early to those particular narratives and those particular sources.
Thank you. We have time for one more question.
Awesome. Congratulations. I've had the pleasure of hearing Brittany, right? And Dr.
St. Bernard.
St. Bernard.
St. Bernard.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, before, and they are phenomenal. And Brian and I are home folks, so I've heard him many times. But you posed a question to us, what are we doing during the day? I'm trying to organize and figure out other ways that we can be effective. You just spoke about teaching history to our children. I go to a very small storefront church, and one of the things that I've suggested is that we have a Black History moment every Sunday. And that in children's church, every Sunday, there's something about Black history and what it means. So I think it's important that we feel what we feel, which may be sadness and frustration and anger, but it's also important that we try and figure out what we can do. Because just feeling those feelings and going inward ain't gonna help us.
At all.
So we have to come up with something, some ways, and there is something that everybody can do.
Yes.
Now, I'm the type that will stand on the corner with a sign. Everybody else might not do that, but they might bring a case of water, right? They might call their representatives, but we can't just feel bad and angry.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Joyce.
Yes, thank you for that.
Because that's what I wanted to end on. And that was, what advice do you have if it's somebody like me who's stuck in the mad, paralyzed phase, who constantly, everything that's going on at this university I'm mad about and ready to fight. Everything that comes out of the presidency I'm mad about. I have withdrawn from a lot of stuff because you guys used to see me all around campus and all that. I haven't been in church. I haven't been even reading anymore. I've just been doing mind-numbing things to keep my mind off a lot of this stuff. And I know that I need to get back out there and get ready, get over the fact that I'm angry and I'm pissed. And what advice will you give me as well as everybody else out here of how to move?
Early in my in this panel, I quoted Billy Joel, and I'm going to quote two people at the same time: Barack Obama and Frederick Douglass. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and agitate, agitate, agitate.
I think it's important to remember. I appreciate the comment because I think sometimes there's a subtle temptation to attach shame to the anger. And the anger is what propelled the ancestors. That was anger. I've been to the mountaintop as an angry speech.
There it is.
Right, and Baldwin. I'm gonna loosely paraphrase, but to not be angry right now, I would almost ask, "What's going on with you? Why aren't you mad? You should be mad. It's okay to be mad. It's just where you put that anger. And I think to find yourself in the longer tradition of angry people and align yourself with their forward movement, turn that anger into organization, turn that anger into like scholarship, like reading. I just think I think that there are a lot of places. If you turn it into, if you write poetry, if you play the piano, if you make music, you can find different places to put that anger, and all of those places have value. I don't think we should find practices of dispelling that anger. I think that's where the danger is. When we try to try to put that have the anger evaporate so that we could go about our day. I just think we should stay angry. I think the world demands anger right now, the way it's going about conducting itself, and then it's just asking and appealing to those that came before you and just looking for maybe newer models of what they did, or maybe the same old. We may need the same old models, but just joining them in the practice of engaging angrily. I think we should be angry. That's what, and it's okay to be.
Wow, I agree with everything that was said previously. A couple things come to mind. The first thing is, ask yourself the question I've been asking. It may not be the same for you, but the question I've been asking myself more and more, but especially since Election Day: am I doing what I want to be doing at the end of the world? Am I doing what I want to be doing at the end of the world? Because so much of, and what I've been asking folks that are telling me that this is the empire, we've never seen anything like this. Well, that's not true. My grandmama was 95 when she left here. She understood who 45, 47 was, even though she did not see him become 47. She saw him she understood so clearly, right? Because she'd seen her siblings die from diphtheria, and she'd seen the Great Depression, and she sent my mama to desegregate schools. So the first thing is, ask yourself, are you doing what you want to be doing at the end of the world? And if you're not, why? Go do it. But allow yourself to get to the point, right? If it ends, if this is really the end, am I where I want to be? And I've really been asking myself that question because I go into a school building most days. And a month and 3 days ago, 2 students didn't come out of a school building in my community, right? Mass shooting came to the district I graduated from, to the district that I teach and have taught in, right? My colleagues had to go back to classrooms at a high school and take attendance roster where 2 children weren't on it. And so if anything, maybe the day after Election Day, I felt a little sober, but what really sobered me was being what would it be like to go into a school after a black child has so internalized their own anti-blackness to kill another child of color, right? Because that's such a picture of this of what we're talking about. So I've had to ask myself when I pull up to school, right? Is this where you want to be? Are you doing what you want to be doing at the end of the world? Because the end of my world might come that day. My mama's on the phone with me sometimes when I pull up to school, and I say, let everybody I love who's going into a school come out today. Let all my students that come in go back home today. Let me come home today if that's what is supposed to happen. So that's part one is ask yourself, are you doing what you want to be doing at the end of the world? And the other part is ask for help, right? Because I cannot do what I want to be doing at the end of the world without a lot of help. And so that is where you organize. That is where you get in community with people. And yes, that is where you ask the people before you, help me. Baldwin, help me. Tony, help me. Zora, help me. Marvin Gaye, help me. Etta, help me. You talking about a Sunday kind of love, and all I hear on Sunday is something about Elon Musk. Help me.
Thank you. Thank you to the audience for being here. Thank you to our panelists for, you've given me such inspiration. So I will be asking you for help. Thank you. And thank you to Dr. Henry Doss.
Yes.
Dr. Doss, do you want to tell them what else is coming this week?
Again, thank you all. This has been an extraordinary panel. I knew it was going to be good, and I've been waiting for it, and you did not disappoint. This is wonderful, thank you. We do have a couple more events happening this week. We had to move some events from last week because of the weather. So tomorrow night, this is a student-led event. It's International Studies, Global Lessons for Understanding Each Other. So it's students who have traveled and studied abroad who will be a part of that panel. And on Thursday night, the Weekly County Reconciliation Project will host Honest Conversations. And that's a session that will be driven by card prompts that deal with race and equity and community. So that's going on Thursday. Both of those events will take place in the library at 6 o'clock. So we hope you'll come out to the International Studies event tomorrow and then the Weekly County Reconciliation Project on Thursday.
It's in the library, not upstairs?
No, in the library.
Okay.
Library, first floor, back where the bay windows are. So thank you all again for coming. Appreciate it. This was a great discussion and one that I hope we can have again. So, thank you
Yes.
all.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm glad it was good to be here.